In my video on the top 10 weakest abilities, someone made a comment asking me to talk about the most mediocre abilities in the game, which I thought was actually an interesting idea considering a ton of champions have that one ability that's not unusable per se, but definitely doesn't carry the same importance in their kit relative to their other skills. It's inevitable for players to prioritize one ability over another given you can only level up one thing at a time. Virtually all champions have a sequential skill order, that is, you want to fully max out one then move on to the next. I don't think there's a single champion who alternates between two abilities as their most efficient use of their levels, much less a champion who levels up their 3 spells evenly. Naturally, you can associate the final ability as their most mediocre, but I wanted to go through some abilities that in the context of their moveset are not really all that great. Again, not implying they're bad or unusable, they just have the lowest value in their kit, and if it wasn't obvious, this is mostly my opinion. Players of the champs I mentioned may disagree with my point of view, and that's fine. I just think it would make for a fun topic, so let's get started. First ability will be the one you see right in the center of the thumbnail, Jace's Hammer W, Lightning Field. Objectively speaking, this is a very powerful ability in a vacuum, allowing your basic attacks to restore mana on hit, and no small amount would be amazing to have on any champion with a high mana cost. Also, if you give this to someone who scales off AP, the AoE damage would be extraordinary. The reason it's not super great on Jace is because he seldom if ever gets the chance to benefit from Hammer W. Generally speaking, he'll spend most of his time in cannon form, making use of the range advantage to attack and wave clear safely, only switching to hammer form when going for a quick burst trade or to knock enemies away. Plus, he tends to run Biscuit and or Mana Flow Band and rush tier right away, so mana cost isn't the biggest concern for him beyond the first 10 minutes, and he never goes attack speed or ability power, so he doesn't replenish mana that fast to begin with. The active is more of an assist tool for wave clearing. The real reason people level up his W second is for hypercharges increased damage and shorter cooldown. This indirectly levels up his Hammer W for more damage as well. It's just better to upgrade W second for more DPS than E, given Acceleration Gate doesn't scale in any way besides movement speed. Speaking of Acceleration Gate, some of you may be asking why I went for Lightning Field when Cannon Form E might make more sense. I think Acceleration Gate's a great utility tool for speeding up allies, and also because it grants vision, so it has a bit more utility. To repeat, Lightning Field's not a bad ability, it's just a mediocre one. Moving on, let's talk about Jarvan the Fourth's Golden Aegis. Prior to 13.3, this would have been easily one of the worst abilities in the game, as it had one of the lowest shield values of all time, barely enough to block maybe one AP champion's basic attack at most. Since acquiring a bonus AD ratio, it's become somewhat usable, but it's still pretty lame all things considered. While it has no cast time and a low mana cost, Golden Aegis doesn't really do that much. It applies a very tiny slow to enemies around him and a small shield even with the bonus AD ratio. It does increase based on a portion of his max health, but even with 5 enemy champions tagged, it's only 6.5%. Just about every other shield in the game is stronger than this one, even Shen's Key Barrier can shield for more than Golden Aegis, and that's a passive. Historically, it actually used to be an incredible shield, especially when going tank Jarvan. Before 7.7, it used to give a bonus amount per enemy hit, so with 5 champions, the total was 670 HP. Not the most impressive amount, but it was certainly enough to keep him alive, and it was also a flat amount you didn't have to scale. Following 7.7, however, it was given a 4% max health ratio instead, so with 5 champions, that would have been 20% max health, one of the bigger shields out there. Assuming you went Bruiser J4, you were staring at almost 1000 HP shield, a far more respectable value than what it usually gets now. I do appreciate that they gave him a descaling on his shield to incentivize a more Bruiser J4 instead of full tank though. Third ability will be Lee Sin's Cripple, the follow-up ability after casting Tempest. In fairness, similarly to Jace, considering these champions have effectively 6 abilities, it makes perfect sense for said abilities to have less impact overall. So it might not seem that fair to put these champions on the list, but while Iron Will is a fantastic buff to have, Cripple is comparatively worse. All it does is apply slow to enemies. Granted at rank 5 it's a pretty heavy slow, but it used to do so much more back in the day. Cripple used to also reduce attack speed along with movement speed, which is funny considering the skill shares the same name with the actual status effect, Cripple, reducing attack speed. It used to have a range of 800, and the attack speed reduction was the same as the movement speed slow I believe, meaning you could tag on a 60% cripple to all enemies around you. Imagine if he had that in the present day, an AoE Nasus Wither essentially. I get that in the context of his kit, having a big slow is a huge benefit for ensuring he can land his Q more consistently, but I feel like a lot of people forget Cripple's even a thing. Most people go Emax to cap out the damage on Tempest, not really for the slow. The stick potential is handy for bruiser builds though. Remember, the whole premise of the video is that these abilities have their uses, just not very big ones. Next ability will be Twisted Fate's E, Stacked Deck. Trying to enunciate that's difficult, so I'm just gonna call it Stacked Deck. Back when they played around with making TS scale off crit strikes and stuff, going Emax first was a popular thing in top lane, but then they went and nerfed it, so it's not that great anymore. Even pre-buff though, it was still not that great either. TF was always seen as that 2 ability champ, Q and W. All Stacked Deck did was give him a tiny bit of attack speed and slightly more damage if you lined up your pick a card with a 4-hit passive. Before 14.2, TFC was so bad, 10% attack speed in rank 1 and only 40% in rank 5, and there was only a 40% AP ratio. Granted, 40% AP paired with the massive AP ratio buffs he got on blue card makes him one of the most consistent one-tap champs in the game, but on its own, it's a really lousy ability that functionally behaves as a second passive. I get that they can't make it all that strong though, considering what happened when it was actually allowed to be. Most ranged champions with attack speed buffs get 40 to 80% or something around that because it's a buff, it's temporary, whereas Stack Deck is passively applied. Understandable why it's a mediocre ability. Okay, this one might be a super hot take, but hear me out. Vars Caretaker Shrine. Of the 3 abilities in this kit, this is definitely the least impactful one. I'm aware of its many strengths. Caretaker Shrine lasts forever until they're consumed or destroyed, and you can place up to 3 of them around the map at any given point in time. If you let the shrine marinate for 5 seconds, both the heal and speed boost get stronger, and in a pinch you can cast it directly on a teammate for a quick heal and speed boost. So there are uses for it. Again, for the umpteenth time, we're not talking about useless abilities, we're talking about mediocre ones. Caretaker Shrine doesn't heal that much, and it shouldn't. If it healed as much as a Soraka W, it would be broken to I think more people appreciate it, not for the healing, more the speed boost than anything else. Of course, if you stack up 3 shrines next to each other and they're all fermented, you get a fairly sizable 600 base plus 180% HP heal, but the reason healers like Soraka and whatnot are so strong is because theirs is instant, whereas Bard's is not. Furthermore, Bard almost never builds heal and shield power anyway in light of being a jack of all trades support. The key reason why you level up Caretaker Shrine second is because Magical Journey is one of those non-scaling abilities. Continuing on, let's talk about Amumu's Despair. This ability is weird. Some claim it's one of the best damaging auras in the game, while others forget it's even a thing. It does 14 plus 2% max health base damage per second, increased by 10% thanks to his passive. The real function of Amumu's W is to apply Cursed Touch to everyone around him, not really for the damage. What's interesting is that Amumu's W frequently gets changed around by a slight margin, even though you would think it doesn't really make much of a difference. In 13.9 it changed by 0.2% per tick, same thing in 13.4, then again back in 12.23, and then again back in 11.17. It keeps fluctuating between 0.8 and 1% every so often. Much of that could be inferred from Amumu having extremely powerful abilities across the board. Cursed Touch is overpowered, 10% bonus pre-mitigation true damage on all sources of magic damage. You ever wonder why Baron gets torn to pieces whenever the enemy team has an Amumu and one other high DPS AP champ? That's why. Bandage Toss is one of the best basic abilities in the game. 2 long-range dashes with a 1-second stun each, and a fairly high AP ratio if you decide to go AP Amumu. Tantrum's a very spammy AoE damaging ability with built-in mitigation, and Curse of the Sad Mummy is a massive super ultimate. It makes perfect sense why his W in comparison looks underwhelming. Everything else in his kit is busted. Okay, I'm cheating again with this one, I know, but hear me out. Hui's WQ, Fleeting Current. Of the 9 abilities in his kit, this is by far, in my opinion, the least impactful one. It just creates a current that increases move speed, and not by that much. Tempo is objectively a very underappreciated steroid in the game, and I've always been a proponent of it, but Hui's WQ definitely gets overlooked a lot, whether it's because you'd rather sustain mana and boost your damage or WE, or use WW for an AoE shield for your party. Alternatively, it could be because WQ is just an underwhelming ability. I feel like it has the least pronounced use within Hui's kit. QQs for poke damage, QWs for sniping or damaging a CC'd enemy, QEs for wave clear, WWs for party protection, WEs for mana sustain, EQ is for peel or catching enemies out, EW is for zoning, and EE is more for follow-up on either wave clear or traits. WQ does see some use. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, this isn't useless abilities, it's mediocre abilities, but if I had to choose between this and say Chase's acceleration gate, I would rather go with the latter. Next ability will be Anivius W, Crystallize. This ability is either completely worthless or the bane of your existence, never in between. Of all the terrain generating abilities, I find this to be the least impactful, and terrain generating abilities have already been losing value in light of there being so much mobility. If you're playing an immobile champion, Anivia can trap you in between an icicle and a hard place while freezing you to death with her ultimate. But if you have any means of dashing, it may as well not exist. At the very least, for Trundle's Pillar of Ice, it comes with a knockup and a slowing aura, whereas Anivius W is a strict area control tool. I know at higher ranks it can be wide enough to completely seal off the entrance to mid lane's inhib tower, but I feel like if Anivia players were given the option to swap out Crystallize with Trundle's Pillar of Ice, they would do it in a heartbeat. There's not much internal synergy with her W and the rest of her kit compared to say Ornn's Volcanic Rupture setting up a Searing Charge for a knockup. I do see Anivia players use Crystallize after tossing out a Q to slightly knock opponents into it, but that seems like more of a niche adaptation and not really something the champion was intended to work on. Speaking of terrain generation, let's talk about Yorick's Dark Procession. Again, if the enemy champion has no dash and you land this, you tear people to shreds. But if they do have a dash, this ability does not exist. Dark Procession is one of the reasons why Yorick destroys Darius and Alawi. They're basically stuck in there getting gangbanged by Mistwalkers all the live long day. Conceptually, I love the gimmick of York being able to walk through the cage freely while his opponents cannot, which adds an element of mind gaming to it. But in practice, this is the worst terrain generation ability in the game. Even if the enemy champion has no escape if they can attack fast with autos like Urgot's W, the thing gets torn down so quickly. You basically have to put 2 extra points into W to get into 3 autos worth of health before you really start to see mileage out of it. Once more, if York could trade his W for Trundle C, he'd probably do it in a heartbeat, but more so in his case, any kind of lockdown would be a death knell for his bounce, since the only thing keeping York fair is that he can't guarantee his damage on you. If he could lob his ghouls onto you and you were stuck in place, he'd be one of the strongest champions bar none. Dark Procession is partly the reason why he's such a surprisingly good counter against top laners who beat everyone else in head-on fights like Alawi, Cassante, Mordekaiser, and whatnot. If he lands W, they're basically screwed. Beyond that, there's a reason he gets cooked by anyone with a dash or rapid-fire attacks like Urgot. Second to last mediocre ability will be Ahri's Foxfire. Kinda like Golden Aegis, Foxfire used to be an awful ability. Then over the years, more of her power budget got put into it to make it more usable. It gives you a brief surge of movement speed that was on her passive before that and was on her Q before that. And of course, it was given the execute minions component. But if you look at Foxfire's damage against champions, it's just weak. Not even a 50% AP ratio, and it has passable base damage. I get that being an auto-target ability with a low mana cost, they can't make it that strong, but I always thought Foxfire was one of the weakest damaging abilities in the game. Of course, when Ahri tags all 3 of her abilities, there's a lot of damage in a single trade, but individually, Foxfire pales in comparison to a lot of other AP mages' secondary damaging abilities in my opinion. In her defense though, she is a mobile mage, whereas most mages with high damage are immobile, and she does have 4 damaging abilities that can all easily land on one target, so they can't overbuff her damage too much. Final mediocre ability will be Aatrox's Infernal Chains. In a similar respect to York, if Aatrox had any semblance of assured lockdown, he would single-handedly become the best top laner in the game. Darken Blade's massive 420 plus 540% total AD on the triple sweet spot is balanced purely by the fact that landing a triple sweet spot's next to impossible unless you're fighting Mordekaiser or someone with no chance to escape. I was honestly torn on whether to include this because Infernal Chains is impactful if you use it right. But of course, there's always the meme of how you can just walk right out of it. Even at higher ranks, the slow is too insufficient for Chains to pull you back on its own because by then, everyone has boots. Assuming the enemy champion has no sums or dashes, if you tag 1 empowered Q, they shouldn't be able to walk out of W fast enough, but most champions do have dashes, making this ability almost pointless against them. What's interesting about Infernal Chains is being a tether, people have a terrible habit of trying to flash or dash out of it right at the end, but the pull checker already goes through, so you see people flashing out of Infernal Chains only to get dragged back into it because they did it too late. Apart from that though, this rounds out the list as the final mediocre ability. I think altogether, that's 11 abilities in total, quite a few out there. What do you guys think about the list? Do you agree or disagree with my choices? Feel free to share in the comments. While you're down there, let me know if you think there are other mediocre abilities I haven't mentioned. I'd love to hear about them. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you gave it a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other ability discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.